Hello and welcome to the Cuyamunga Institute, our Q&A Conversation for Exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the President and Executive Director of the Institute, along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education and Outreach. And on behalf of our Board of Directors, our advisors, our volunteers, and supporting members, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Cuyamunga Institute is an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience, following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And as an educational institution, we take an open approach and we invite scholars in related fields that help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration. And that's why we call this Conversation for Exploration. And on these weekly Sunday discussions, we've had a full spectrum of topics from neuroscience and anthropology, art history, archaeology, mythology, mysticism, trance states, shamanism, wisdom traditions, sacred landscapes, dance, so much more. You're welcome to visit our website at cuyamungainstitute.com. All of our presentations are free, and as a nonprofit, we invite you to become a supporting member. And of course, we want to thank you, the community members who continue to support the mission of the Cuyamunga Institute. Today, what can practitioners of traditional medicine and healing learn from Western medicine? Actually, let's flip that question around. What can doctors of Western medicine learn from the practice of indigenous traditional medicine? Here are the facts. There are more than 370 million people representing 5,000 distinct indigenous peoples throughout the world. Indigenous peoples around the planet continue to advocate for the right to retain, practice, and share their cultural beliefs and traditional medicinal practices. Here in this country, it's become popular in the West to include herbal remedies as part of healthcare. However, the services of traditional healers goes far beyond just the use of herbal healthcare. So for example, the traditional medicine of Africa is the oldest and perhaps the most assorted of all therapeutic systems. And considered to be the cradle of mankind, Africa has a rich biological and cultural diversity. Traditionally, African healers serve many roles, which include, but not limited to, the custodians of the traditional religion and customs, educators about the culture, counselors, social workers, and psychologists. And in light of the benefits of traditional medicine, many Asian, African, and South American countries now allow the development of a dual system of medicinal care, where individuals can choose whether they want to visit the traditional medicine clinics or whether go to the Western clinics. And in this country, the number of major academic and health centers promoting integrative medicine, a blend of the conventional Western traditions along with the traditional medicine, such as Chinese practices, Ayurveda, herbal remedies, nutrition, yoga, meditation. This has all exploded. But make no mistake, Western medicine has contributed tremendously to the quality of life and longevity of millions of people throughout the world. And at the same time, it seems equally important to recognize and protect the contributions of indigenous cultures, the medicinal worldwide practices and contributions, and these healing practices as well. So we're fortunate today to have an MD with us that honors both the traditional roots of medicine along with his Western medicine practice.
Well, as you say, it's about time that Western medicine integrated so many of these techniques and practices and ways. But our guest today has a foot in both worlds, that very important dialogue, because he's been initiated into those practices. He's learned those techniques, and it's really changed his worldview. And that's what we're interested in here, is the worldview. And we have to look to our past to understand where 99% of the human story was spent in indigenous cultures. We're such an anomaly here in the West. We really are. So to understand where we're going, we need to look at where we've been and then take better aim at the future and integrate it all. And I appreciate that David Cumes, a surgeon practicing in Santa Barbara, born in South Africa, and the author of The Spirit of Healing, of Inner Passages, Outer Journeys, the source and bones of Africa, is here to share his own personal story with us today. That of such an adventurous life, and welcome, David. It's good to have you back here with us.
Yeah.
Well, it's
You
great
have.
to be visual this time as opposed to headline. And
And we're
your
gonna,
passion is palpable, I must say. It's really wonderful to see how passionate you guys are. It's terrific.
well, we plan on interviewing you every 25 years. So
Fine.
once every 25 years. This
Next
is
time
kind
you'll be able to interview me from the other side. You'll be on this side, I'll be on the other side. That's what we can hope for.
we can do that too.
You know, we this work with the ancestors, the work with the spirit realm, right?
Yeah.
The work with the unseen, the invisibles. It's something that has been so much a part of the traditional medicines. Very few researchers, doctors, healers go and journey to that depth that you have. So you have a seat that most of us in a journey that most of us will never have. And so we appreciate you as a guide here today, and to see what you've learned and how it's transformed your understanding of what healing really is. Where do you want to start? How did this, tell us your life story. How did this call to adventure start for you?
Begin.
Well, it started with a sort of an existential crisis relating to Western medicine, really not being able to relate to what was going on. And also, difficulties in my marriage. So in 1987, I took off to the Bushmen and I spent about 3-4 weeks with them, most of it on my own, hunting and gathering with them and, sort of witnessing the way they live. So what happened when I came back from that, I decided to start a little company called Inward Bound, which took people out into wild places for wilderness healing. And I developed this idea of wilderness rapture, that when you get out with the right intention, you can really get into the kind of altered states that you're talking about just through nature, because I learned that from the Bushmen. Their skills come entirely from them being nature bound. And while I was taking trips, I deviated from my Peru experience back to my roots. And while I was doing trips to South Africa, I was always go and check in with the Sangomas, the healers there, to see how the trip was going to go and to get more direction in my life. And almost invariably, every time I had a reading, they said to me, your ancestors are calling you to do this medicine, our medicine, dream and trance. And I didn't believe it. I mean, I wanted to. I thought, wow, I'd like nothing better, but I'm just a left-brained doctor. I don't have any of those capabilities. One of them did say you have good dreams. So I did know that sometimes I was having precognitive dreams. But as for the other shamans I'd met, I was not capable of doing any of those things. But then I met a woman, and I think you've got a slide up of that, because I was getting so much information. It was so compelling that I had to do something about it. In fact, a woman I talked to, a white woman from South Africa who was living in San Diego, said, Dave, you've got to do something about it. So I went to, what's called Mpumalanga, which is where the Kruger National Park is. And I asked to see a Sangoma there who would really help me. I met, the husband came in and he wanted to throw bones, but he was the worst divine I've ever had. And this woman that you've got on a slide will come in. I'll just let you show the slide. And she's in the possessed state. Yes, so she spontaneously went into a possessed state while he was doing bones, and he said, I have to step aside. This other person, the spirit, is coming to talk to you. And she literally read me the riot act. She said, you haven't been listening to your ancestors. They've been telling you what to do. Your bad headaches will not go away until you listen. I was getting incessant migraines. And this is really what drove me to get initiated. And eventually I found a healer, and you'll see in some of the slides, P.H. Mshali in Swaziland, who threw the bones again and agreed that I should be initiated and that he should do it. And that's how the whole story began. And this you can see, this is not when I was first there. This was filmed later when I went back with some other folks. But by that time, I was already underway with my initiation.
So the idea of the ancestors knocking on your door ever more persistently to get your attention. We hear that story a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, the guides. Yeah.
The interesting thing is when I did get initiated with this fellow P.H. and Charlie, who was a master diviner, he basically said, yes, your migraines won't go away until we initiate you. And they went away afterwards. So it was kind of interesting. That's called the ancestor sickness, the twice sickness in South Africa, where the ancestors are calling you to get initiated, and you usually go to a physician to find out what's wrong. You have some kind of somatic complaint, and the physicians can't find anything wrong. And then you go to see a healer or a Sangoma or a Nyanga in South Africa, and they say, no, your ancestors are calling you. But, I didn't know what, I thought I just was having migraines, and I didn't suspect it was something else.
Pain can be very useful, can't it, to get your attention and to force you to seek a remedy and relief. So, I'm just wondering if migraines happen because we're not using some part of our ability that's coming to the forefront. I mean, how do you explain it as a physician? How would you explain it?
What they say in Africa, they say your ancestors are annoyed with you, and that's why they're trying to get your attention. But my teacher always wondered why they didn't attack me more. He said, "How come you're getting away so easily?" And I think that's their paradigm. He's a patriarchal Zulu, and he's very tough kind of a guy. And I think the presence of ancestral spirits around you, whether they're intrusive and negative, or whether they're positive, has somatic effects, either headaches, depression, anxiety, things not going well in your life, trouble with relationships, that sort of a thing. And they don't mean you any harm. They're just trying to get your attention. The effect can be very similar to intrusive spirit that you don't want, but it's not malicious. They're wanting to get your attention.
Yeah, it's that idea of Martha Beck, finding your own North Star. When your life is going well, then pay attention. Yeah, you're on the right track. When it's not, pay attention, get on the right track.
Correct. But also, if your life is not going well, it might be on the right track, but you're already now visible to the spirit world, the other side, the dark side, and they're trying to get you off the path. So it can be the other thing too.
Tell us about, you mentioned the San Bushmen. Could you tell us about your encounters there?
Yeah,
So
when I
you're
went,
here in Africa where our species began. If you want to go back to the earliest culture, the San Bushmen are a good one to look at. They've been carrying on their traditions for time immemorial, have they not?
well, that's exactly right. That's why I went there. I thought to myself, I was in the New Age, and I was in California. I was a very critical, cynical physician. And I thought, look, if I'm going to find truth, I'm going to find it back there,
Yeah.
And I thought, whatever I find there will be true. And I think that's what happened with me with the Bushmen. There were things that happened that were very bizarre that I couldn't really explain. For instance, the Bushmen didn't trance at that time, but I went back repeatedly and witnessed the trance dancing many times, and you'll see some pictures of that later. But essentially, there were things that happened. They threw bones for me then, and they said, you'll have a very good trip. And I wasn't sure what that meant. But one of the Bushmen actually gave me a divination kit. And I'd forgotten that I'd taken it home until more recently, the last several years when I was traveling back to do groups. I made myself in a second kit in case my bones were confiscated in customs. And I dug up this one the Bushmen had given me in 1987. So they knew something that was going on, but probably it's very hard for an African, especially with apartheid and all those things, to tell a white guy, hey, you need to be like me. It was fine for me to hear that. For most people wouldn't have accepted that, so why would I do that type of thing? So the other thing that was interesting, because the guy might have trance danced that night, and I wasn't there and I was sleeping on my own away from the encampment. And he came the next morning, this old man, and he said, if you travel there, and he pointed his finger, you will see Gemsbok. Those are oryx. And I wanted to do a hunt with the Bushmen. And I'd not seen any. There was, because of the cattle running around, there were no big game at all. There were small antelopes, there were other small animals that they would trap, but nothing that they would hunt. And literally, we traveled in the direction for the way he said, and we saw about 20 oryx, Gemsbok. And it was extraordinary. And he obviously saw it either in a dream or in his trance dance. So the trance dance was something to enable them to see where to hunt the next day, maybe to find a lost child, or to know where to go when they were nomadic and they were, hunting and gathering and moving from place to place, or to heal and to cure their tribes. So it was absolutely essential. They could not have survived in the severe desert without the ability to go into the field and get information that helped them.
Go into the field. Paul, you have some
I have
slides?
a few slides on the
And
Bushman
thank you for
trance.
sharing your photos with us, David. Yep.
So this was in several years after 1987. This was in Kai, and this is a group of Bushmen who what they do. The trance dance goes on all night, and the whole energy is generated by these amazing chants of the woman. They're unbelievable thing, and clapping. They don't have drums. They just clap, and they clap with their hands open like this. And the men dance around the fire with rattles around their ankles, and it's a very rhythmic, simple chant. And they go into trance. They fall down, and they travel out of the body into the spirit world, where they get non-local information not localized in space and time. And then they come back to the group, and they either put hands on them. They're very powerful in terms of their healing. They can transmit the so-called num, which is probably kundalini energy, into the person that's ailing. Here's a Bushman falling into trance. He's nearly falling in the fire, and I've seen them control fire, but obviously the woman would be sure to push him out of the way. They call this the little death because, in a sense, it's like a near-death experience. And some of the less mature dancers are in danger of getting out into the field and not coming back. So in this instance, there was one dancer who was young, and they were having a lot of trouble, a lot of difficulty getting back into his body. They usually come back into the body and somebody does some sort of body work and helps them a little bit, but these are very experienced dancers, but it's a dangerous thing to do. So what happened was, in this case, they were dancing around him. He wasn't coming back, and they were worried he was going to get lost, between the worlds and the veil. And a woman took a coal from next to the fire, which is probably in the next slide. And this isn't the man. This is the first guy you saw who fell into trance. The one who they were falling all over the place. There were 3 or 4 of them in trance, but this is the fellow they couldn't bring back. And a woman eventually took a whole hot coal from the fire. You can't see it because it's not a video, but she's wincing when she picks it up and she puts it in his mouth, and that brings him back into his body. So she pretty much saved his life. The women also trance dance, but they usually do it on their own, and they have their own songs. And the women are often more powerful healers than the men frequently, which is true in the Sangoma tradition as well.
So leaving your body, how do you explain that how do you explain a spirit taking over the body, possession, somebody leaving their body as in this trance dance? What do you think is going on?
Well, this is very advanced spiritual work. There are very few people, I think, that can do that. And it's incredibly pure. I think it arises out of the purity of their existence, the fact they have very little ego, they're non-judgmental, they have an open, loving heart. They say, if you want to be a good healer, you must love everybody, no matter what you think about them. And they have the purity of nature, and they're relating to all the vibrations of nature. They don't, when they hunt and they track, many times they're not following the tracks. They just know where to go. There's something that's telling them where to go, where the animal is. So their purity is what allows them to do that. And I think that's very difficult for the Westerner to do. It's not something I could ever do. There's one guy, Brad Keeney, who says he did it. I'm sure he did in some way, but it's not an easy thing to do. The best thing that we can do really is trance channeling. We'll talk about possession, which is remember, the Bushmen are the original people. We all have Bushman DNA in us. The Africans came down from the north, the Bantu peoples came down from the north and joined the Bushmen. And there was a lot of conflict, of course, and there was always wars, and they sort of weren't that nice to the Bushmen, just like the whites weren't very nice to them or to the Bushmen. But they adopted some of their methods, including the divination. Divination is a rapid way of getting a message, because you can't dance all night if there's a lost child or you want to go hunting and you're not sure what direction to go. So they said that they got the Africans first started with divination, But in reality, the Africans have what's called transposition, where the ego steps aside and the spirit of an ancestor comes into the body and takes over completely. So sometimes they talk in tongues, which can happen here with some of the holy rollers. They talk in tongues. Those people get possessed, but they get possessed rather than leave their body. And the ancestor comes into the body and will often want a garment that makes them feel comfortable to wear. Might want some water to drink because they can experience sensory pleasures now, they can taste. And then they will give information not localized in space and time. And in this case, the woman you saw got possessed, and the ancestors came through to say, hey, listen, give this guy a reality check. He needs to get busy and do his work. But when I did my initiation, my grandfather came to me and said, you will not get possessed, meaning you should not get possessed. And I did trance channel, but my ancestors weren't in favor of another spirit taking over your body completely and losing your free will, because free will is the cosmic law. And I know that's very much in line with the kind of work that you do as well.
Absolutely.
So the trance channeling that I did, where the spirit is there and they somehow are intuitively sending a message to you. The other way to do it is in dreams, that the ancestors can script your dreams. And I've got some DVDs on my website if anybody's interested in how they do that. They script your dreams, and that can be very useful. And also the other way is divination, which is a really easy way. And basically the ancestors, my African spirit who helps me with the bones, Mpofu, she was a Sangoma in her previous life. She's an African spirit. She helps me with the bones. She actually throws the bones by a form of telekinesis, psychokinesis. So the bones do not fall random. They form in a very readable sort of fashion, where they are oriented often in 3 different positions. Each position means something different, oriented in relation to one another as well. And then they talk to each other. And they're different bones, which are usually small animal bones, hyena bones, lion bones, baboon bones, anteater bones, and so on. Each one has its own particular energy, and each one is manipulated by the spirit in a certain way that it forms, and you can read the message. So you're reading the dream that's the person's life, and it's highly accurate. So this is why when I went to see these Sangomas, they were all very good. They all said the same thing: you need to get initiated. And I was told, go and get another opinion and you'll say the same thing. And that's exactly what happened.
So your destiny is to be a bridge between these two worlds.
That's exactly right, actually. In fact, I think it was my grandfather. A lot of the channeling was done as soon as I had a friend, a very good friend, Mary Ellen Kelly, who actually left the planet this Memorial weekend. And I got my messages in dreams, and I got songs in dreams, but she would channel all these messages that we've been getting over the years and that have instructed us. So that in reality, the divination is what your question was alluding to. They said to you are to take from there to bring to here. That was my mission. It wasn't for me to go from here to there. There are 250,000 Sangomas in South Africa. They don't need another one, least of all a white one. Some of them are much more powerful than I am. So the idea was to bring it here because that technology is really not here. I would say it is here. Malidoma Some did it. He did it with shells rather than animal bones, but it's the same principle. Sadly, he left the planet recently. And the nice thing about the divination, because Mpofu came in a dream, at least when I was channeling, the one time I actually channeled her, she said, Dave will not get possessed because they'll think he's crazy in California if he gets possessed. Imagine a California doctor. They'll think I'm taking LSD or something. He says his way will be the divination, the bones. So it's easy for me to leave my office, come to the yurt, throw the bones. I just read the message. He gives me the message, and it's very easy.
You mentioned the field. So part of this is, my understanding, dissolving the boundaries. And then our consciousness can start to read out the information, be connected, imbibe life force, kundalini, whatever you want to call it, that
Correct.
we can dissolve boundaries temporarily. We navigate this world very successfully with our intellect, but we have more muscle in our minds to utilize. And so this is available to all of us. I keep looking at the dung beetle that can navigate by the light of the arm of the Milky Way.
Mm.
It's receiving information. So can we. We live in a sea of information. How do you understand the field and what's possible and how you can read this out and
Well,
open to this?
that's why what you're doing is so important, because the reality is we need to get back to our indigenous self. It's very hard to do that. The easiest way in terms of Kundalini, which the Bushmen call Num and the Zulus call Umbulini, it's a universal phenomenon, but it's used in different ways. So anything that will align our chakras and our energy body and open up our third eye, any spiritual practice that's, that's good for the person involved, that's done for its own sake, that's enjoyable and can be maintained, can help us open up the third eye so we can access the field. The thing that I learned is that everybody's different. And I was always looking, this guy can do that. I can't do that. I can't trance channel, I can't even channel properly. I did it in my initiation, but that was very, very particular. So my way was going to be the bones and the divination. Mary Ellen Kelly, who helped me, and we became, became like sort of a spiritual partnership. She would download paragraphs from ancestors. She had an incredible ability to see them, to download them in the dream state mostly. And they would come to her and sort of in slow motion, they would give her the message, and then she'd wake up and write them down in great detail. So one of the problems I think we all have is we don't know what it is that our particular technique is to, it may be one thing. It's useless to keep trying and perseverating on something that's not working for you. Like I wasn't going to get possessed if I stayed in Swaziland for a year. It wasn't going to happen because that wasn't my way. So I think that's the problem, is to find that little opening, that entry point where you can get that information.
Yeah, we all, by the grace of the Creator, right?
Yeah.
We all have our special superpowers and we need to awaken
Correct.
them and activate them. And I appreciate the age in which we live because everything's available to us. If you were born in one culture, you're pretty much locked into what that culture offers, but we're pan-cultural. We have everything accessible to us, so we have no excuse not to find our ways, our individual ways, and what our destinies. Yeah. Divination, you were going to show some slides.
Okay, here we go.
So I think the thing that was very lucky, the ancestors always say, you'll find the teacher that's meant for you. And PH was a master diviner. He was unbelievable. And it took me about 2 years going back and forth. He gave me permission to come for a month at a time because of my practice. And it happened over a period of about 2 years. And what you would have to do twice a day, they would drum and you would dance, and then you would learn the bones. And I was learning them pretty well. But the interesting thing they said to me was, you will not be finished. There were two things I had to do. Firstly, it's not easy to dance in front of Africans, when you're a white guy. So I had to dance, and I had to dance to the drum, and that was really important. The other thing they said is that you will not be initiated until you go to the water spirit. And everything turned around when they decided to take me to the water. I went with another healer.
Like a baptism.
It's like a baptism, exactly. But we went to this pristine pool right in the middle of the bush, and there were all sorts of rituals I had to do. And I didn't know what the water spirit is, but I think something to do with getting feminine energy from the water. There's certainly something there in the water, and I didn't know what that was. So I went with these two Sangomas, and they put me in the pool. There was a beautiful area. We had to do rituals first and offerings to the water spirit. They put me in the pool. They gave me a blue rope to hold on to, tied to a dead tree. The one guy was standing by the tree. The other guy was in the water. And it was a bizarre experience, because what would happen is they would push me under the water. And as I came up, they would slap my face and hit me. The one guy would hit me. He was powerful, so he didn't hit me too hard. But then after he's finished hitting me, he pushed me down. I think that was to get me out of my head. Like, let's get rid of this guy's intellect. At the time, I don't know for how long.
Shift gears.
Because intellect is the problem. Your cognitive brain gets in the way. And then eventually, I don't know how long it was going on. Eventually, he said, okay, get out. And I barely could walk. I stumbled out of the pool onto a rock, and I had a full-blown Kundalini experience. And then everything changed. When they would drum, I would start to shake. And as you'll see, if we've got the video, you can't see the live part, but there's one woman who does Femba on me. And when the first part of, you'll see when the spirit comes into the body, they're shaking. And that's part of the Kundalini experience. The Bushmen actually fall into trance. They don't shake. So everybody's a bit different. But everything changed after that experience. And the bones were pretty damn good when I was before, but they were much better after. And that was when I started to channel, and then I felt I was complete. And then I went to another Sangoma to make sure I passed the test, and he said, "No, you finished. All you need to do is learn plant medicines."
What you throw the bones? What can you tell? I mean, what are you reading? How does that work?
It's very interesting because it's like a psycho-spiritual CAT scan, because it speaks to your entire cosmology. It talks to your
psycho-spiritual CAT scan. That's a beautiful phrase. Wow. Okay, really, define that.
I like that. So that in reality, that what happens is that the bones talk about your ancestors. There's actually pointing to an ancestor, and the other one is your destiny with the red thing, the red beads around it. It talks to your health. It talks to, do you have any intrusive spirits? Are you bewitched? How's your spiritual practice? How's your Kundalini? How's your third eye? Of course, they don't know what Kundalini is, but they know what Umbelini is. It talks about just about everything under the sun. So always there's a general throw, where often in the general throw, a lot of the information comes up. And frequently people come for another reason, but then they get told something completely different. One guy came to me, and the bones said, your business manager is stealing from you. And he said, no, that's not possible. And later I learned it was true, but he didn't come for that reason. So sometimes it tells you something you don't even know, which is the most important thing. Other times it's just like telling you things you might know and you need to work on. But then you can ask questions as well, in the form of, because free will is the cosmic law, you can't say, help me with my life. You have to say very directly, like, how does it look for this project, that I'm going to do? And then the bones will tell you. And it may be all thumbs up. It might be 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It may be there's more good about it than bad, or more bad about it than good. And then you make your own decision. But the bones tell you what to see. They don't tell you what to do or what to be.
Because we have free will, and it's just giving you like a headlight down the path to see in front of you a little ways.
Yeah, the best example of that is relationships, because a lot of people come about relationships. And then I'm always very careful, because, I said, you want to, throw for the prognosis. And they'll say, yeah, let's throw. And I'll ask, have you done therapy and all the rest of it? And they say, oh, yeah, we've done everything. And I say, well, the prognosis is not good. It looks like you probably need to part. And then I'll also say, if you want some help from the ancestors, we can give you rituals, but you have to be sure, because they won't help you unless you're 100% sure. And they say, well, I don't know, maybe I'll think about it. Well, they say, I'm sure, and then they do it. But many of them come back, 6 months later, they said, the bones were right. Why don't you throw for this person? It's very strange.
Well, I'm signing us up for a reading. I'll let you all know what happens. It'll be interesting. Yeah. Wow. So each bone has its particular statement that it wants to say. How did you? They all look the same to me, other than the ones with the beads. How do you tell the difference?
They are very distinct. There are some that are very similar. That there's a feminine and a masculine one. There's a grandfather and a grandmother on both sides. There's a feminine and masculine. But each bone has its own energy. Like the anteater is the anteater digs the grave. So when you're looking for information about a spirit, or even death, you look to the anteater. The hyena is the person that steals things from you, comes and steals your food, takes your arm off when you're in a tent. So if you're looking for a stolen object or a lost object, you look to the hyena bone. The baboon bone is the trickster. It's the dark forces. In the African context, it can be the tokolosh, which is like I would call the spiritual mafia, really heavy duty, dark stuff. And then I've got another bone for ultra heavy duty dark stuff, that's almost satanic. So it's giving you a profile of your life, especially if you are people like yourselves or the people listening, where you're trying to find your way and it's not easy. And you can get sort of an answer from the ancestors by asking very particular questions that might or might not guide you.
I think there's a lot of systems that humanity has put in place to dialogue with the universe and various aspects of the universe. And so these are kind of systems developed that both sides agree upon and use it as a language or a communication device. I mean, we hear so many. It's these traditions that go on and on. But this dialogue is always taking place. I think we're always picking up intuitive messages where we have our receptors open. Do you think that there are physiological receptors within us, such as the dung beetle can read the light of the Milky Way, a tiny little insect and is reading the light of the Milky Way? Receptors, right? We have receptors in our physiology for this.
Yeah, I think a nice way to describe it. I don't know how I describe it. I think we're all able to access the field in our own unique way.
Yeah.
For an animal like a dog can find its way back, hundreds of miles to its owner, that's
Yes.
unique to the dog, and dogs now can diagnose prostate cancer. So by smelling the urine. Now, how they do that, I have no idea. But there are things that will adapt from their ability to connect to certain vibrations, but they can't do other things. So we have the abilities that are pretty extraordinary, but we've lost them, And I think it's all a question of how open is your third eye? How can you get information from the field and download that information? Whereas maybe in an animal, and I'm just guessing here, maybe an animal is a receptor, but maybe they just can access the field in their own very unique way. They're all very special.
You say one attribute for working with the ancestors is to be humble. That
Yeah,
arrogance really doesn't get you too far
yeah.
in
I
these
think the
realms.
three ingredients are humility is not to think it's you. It's
Yeah.
not you. It's nothing to do with you. It's also very helpful to think it's not you, because a lot of people come in and the healer bone is there and they've got a loving heart. And usually when the healer bone is not like in alignment with its heart, it means they have the heart of a healer, that they're not really doing their job. And then I'll say to them, well, why, what are you doing? I said, well, often maybe they're a nurse and they're not doing what they should be doing. They're doing something that's paramedical, could be even a physician, or they're doing something else. I'm an engineer. So I said, what did you want to do when you were young? Well, I may have wanted to be a doctor. So there may have been a thing that was there. But in reality, what happened to me, and it happens to a lot of people, is that I say to them, are you a healer? And they say, no, but I put my hands on my kids when they have a headache and it goes away. Or my friends come to me and there's a problem and I help them and it goes away. So, and then I say, why the hell aren't you doing that? Well, we've got to learn to live in two worlds, like, you were saying. The one world is what pays the rent, and the other world is your own unique gift that's very particular to you, to nobody else, like that dog who can do something. And that's what you have to express. And when you express that thing, then you are in line with who you're supposed to be. You're the dog who can find its way home. And then you're in line with the cosmos, in alignment with the field. And then you get out of the way of yourself and say, look, it's not about me. It's something it's beyond me. And you just do it. And that's something happened to me, because I said to my teacher, I've got some very important people who live in Santa Barbara that might come to me. They're much smarter than me. What am I going to do when this professor of something comes to me and I'm sitting on a mat on the floor in a yurt and he's going to ask me questions? He said, you just read it. The message is there. Get out of the way and read it, They are doing the work. You are just the messenger. I think that's the one thing, is when it comes to divination. And like you said, it's whether it's the tarot or whether it's ruins, or some people don't need bones. There were some Sangomas, they just see it. immediately. Just find the way that it works for you. But essentially, to get out of the way, the other two things that are really important, I think, is to have an open, loving heart. And that's more for transmitting the energy. I think the divination you can do quite easily if you just get out of the way of yourself. But when it comes to actually healing, you've got to have a loving heart, like the Bushmen say. You've got to love people no matter what you think of them. And then also you have to have faith. Those are the three
You have to
ingredients.
believe that it can
You have to
actually
trust. You have to believe that you can do
trust
it.
the process.
Yeah, and the patient has to believe. Sometimes I've had people, clients coming, and I can't read anything, and
Ah,
I say, "What's going on?" I said, and I throw again. There's nothing. I said, "Well, why are you here?" He said, "No, this is a bunch of crap. My wife gave it to me as a birthday gift, and I didn't want to offend her." And I said, "Well, we can't help you. You need to go."
Yeah.
Because the ancestors want trust, they want respect. You don't talk to them like, you talk to your.
well, and also you have to give permission internally for whatever you're signing up
Exactly.
for. You
You
have
have
to
to.
surrender to
Yeah.
it.
Right.
Yeah.
And often they don't, because they don't do the rituals, and they think, well, it's kind of weird. But the ritual is actually informed consent to the spirit world for a healing outcome. So that essentially what you're
Yeah.
doing is it's a password to the field to
Yep.
say, I want this. And usually it's represented by a medicinal plant that embraces that energy, just like the bones embrace the same thing. It's okay, I need help with my spiritual practice. There's a plant in South Africa, it's called mafabuka. It means wake up, and it will help you wake up your spiritual energy, open your third eye. But you've got to do the work and do the practice as well, and you've got to believe in the ritual that's going to come along with it. If you don't do the ritual, then they're not going to help you.
This stuff
If you
comes
do
with
the,
a lot of responsibility. I always
yeah,
call ritual the sign language to the
yeah,
spirits.
that's a
Right?
good
We
one.
are in dialogue through
Yeah,
ritual. We're
yeah.
reading the cues and making the shifts. Yeah. Oh boy. Wow. Placebo. You mentioned the placebo effect, and a lot of what I've always felt the religious specialists throughout the world have done is enhance the placebo effect. I think it's theater. A lot of it is theater that engages you in suspended disbelief, we would say, for theater, but it's also to pave the way to trust the process.
This
Right? There's a lot of bells and whistles around it that allows you to enter into that.
Yeah.
and
No, it's very,
this ties into your story about the gentleman who received it as a gift. He came in with the block. In other
yeah,
words, no placebo, not opening himself to any kind of thing happening, and
Well, wanting
therefore
to
he's
prove
correct.
his own belief system,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
By not allowing anything to happen so
Right.
he can
That's
confirm his belief and feel safe in his existing belief. What you say, yeah.
that's profound, because that you don't have to believe, but you mustn't disbelieve. You can doubt. You can doubt, but you mustn't disbelieve and you mustn't discredit.
I-
So that's the thing. But the placebo we know is like 30%. That's why drug companies do controlled trials to eliminate the placebo and see what their drug does beyond that. But like you said, if you've got a lot of charm, charisma, compassion, you know, somebody relates to you, the doctor-patient relationship, the bedside manner in the old days, that's gone by the wayside. The computer has taken that away from us. So that's all critical. So some people can raise up the placebo to maybe 70%, maybe 100%. It helps to be stupid because sometimes, being too intellectual, too smart, knowing too much, especially for some of the physicians that I sometimes do divinations for that need something, they're questioning this can't really work. So that's already the whole faith thing. You've got to let go and
well, that
have
was
faith.
part of
You
the
can doubt, but you can't disbelieve. That's a
Yeah.
good nuance.
that's part of the discovery of Dr. Felicitas Goodman, the founder of this institute. Is she said, "This is not a belief system. However, if you have an expectation of nothing happening, you can fulfill that. It's
Free will, yeah.
So when we enter into the idea of holding a posture and being open to the possibility of something happening, that gives us that foundation for an experience to manifest itself. Otherwise, we're blocking it by saying, well, what a bunch of nonsense. My wife brought me to this thing.
Well, I did, didn't I?
She did bring me, but I wasn't blocked. I was open-minded.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's like our father used to say, "I can open the door, but only you can walk through it."
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Now, the other thing, just to talk about how the healing works, the healing works with free will and asking permission for help. So the placebo is part of it, but the ritual is a message to the ancestors, the spirit guides to help you. So that in some cases, the medicinal plants in the part of the world where I had my healing center, it's one of the most biodiverse places on probably, certainly in South Africa, maybe even beyond. So the Sangomas know different plants for different intentions, and some of them have got pharmacological properties. But in reality, it's a combination of belief and the effect of the ancestors with distant healing that is doing the work. And now there are multiple double-blind studies showing that you can take people and heal them from a distance. And even if they don't know about it, there are positive results. So the placebo effect is discounted. But the reality is that, and if there are more healers, that's also true. But the thing about it is that spontaneous remissions and those kind of things come with like absolute 100% belief, faith in the outcome. And that's why when folks go to Lourdes, they're devout Christians and they really believe, bathing in the water, then maybe they're invoking the angels or Jesus or God himself, but through their belief system.
But aren't you also invoking the body's own capacity to heal?
Correct. It's the inner healer that can do anything. It has
Yes.
infinite
You're actually directing the expression of your DNA, the biochemicals, the physiological shit. You're directing that through your, you're harnessing that innate.
You mentioned DNA because it's a spiral.
Right.
And if you think of the Kundalini as a spiral, it doesn't, it's not linear. Kundalini is spiraling up the sun and moon energies. It's not going linear. And if you look at some of the spontaneous remissions at Lourdes and their descriptions they give, it sounds like they're having Kundalini experiences in one way or another. They're visited by an ancestor that says they're going to be fine. The one description was a burning fire in the chest or vibrational energy going up the spine. And I think the Bushmen are powerful healers because I think they can do a kind of a Shakti pat. They can actually transmit the Kundalini into you.
Yeah.
And I think this is why some of the curanderos and the people in the Amazon that are using mind-altering plants have a huge advantage because they get you out of the way of your cognitive brain. And then something can, if you're doubting it, then you're actually seeing it in front of you. And it's for real for you then, and then something miraculous can happen.
Yeah, okay, you mentioned that there are, and I think there's a prime directive that the spirits operate by. In other words, they have to be invited. You have to invite them, right?
Exactly.
There's a free will. But you also said that there are many double-blind studies showing that healing works at a distance, even for people who didn't know or give their permission for the healing to take place, maybe on subconscious level or field level or something happened. But okay, so this can be demonstrated by science. What would happen to our society if people accepted more of this? If we could pass the scientific sniff test and we just accepted that this could happen, how do you think it would change us?
I think it would be huge. It would be absolutely huge because then you are giving permission to access the field to people who have more ability to channel that energy for you, even if you can't do it yourself. The whole thing about those double-blind studies, they've been criticized because it's taken away somebody's free will. And the ancestors are actually quite big on that, is that some people don't want to be well for whatever reason, and that's their choice.
I've met some of them.
Yeah.
And that's their choice. But I'm assuming that in these studies, they were trying every way possible that they wanted to be well, but manifested by the fact that they were trying everything under the sun, chemo, radiation, surgery, whatever. That indicates, hey, I need some help here. Now, whether it comes from another source, even from the doctor himself, or that's irrelevant. So I think that some people have questioned the ethics of those studies, but I don't have a problem with them.
But those studies exist, healing at a distance.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, what's going on when we can, because we see interesting effects at a distance. I always say, okay, theoretical physicists, if you want to see Einstein's spooky effect at a distance in play, just come and hang out with us. We see it all the time, right? And we're not the only ones, right?
No, of
You
course
can
not.
see it in hands-on healing. I've heard the stories, many stories.
Yeah.
What do you think is taking place there?
I think it's accessing the field and giving the field permission. And what it is, it's universal healing energy, which ultimately is just the Creator's love in disguise. In order to channel that energy, there's coherence. If you have a lot of healers that are really good healers and they have the right intention, it's going to be more powerful. There's coherence. But it requires faith on behalf of the person who's accepting the healing. And I think that's all it is. And that if you look at some of these powerful healers like Black Elk, they never took any credit for what they were doing. It was always, and they probably were like Bushmen. They had an open, loving heart and they had faith. The interesting thing, I think, I went to a conference one day, I think it was Black Elk grandson or great grandson. And he said that, or it may have been Rolling Thunder, he said that he always wanted to give himself 3 days before he did any healing for a person. And probably it was for a couple of reasons. One was maybe to find out if that person really was serious about it, but these people were approaching him so they were giving their free will. But maybe he wanted to know from the spirit world whether he was capable of helping them, if they were in dire straits. So rather than letting them believe they were going to be fine, maybe he said, instead of saying, I can't help you, he says, no, I'm not going to do the job or whatever it was. So that's the problem. You can't heal everybody, but you can certainly try.
Well, they say where attention goes, energy flows.
Right.
And so I think we have muscles in working with this that we don't even know we have, right? And when spontaneously something shows up to us to demonstrate this, or we see it and witness it around us, we just want to deny it, ignore it. It's kind of frightening to go, oh, we have skills that we don't even know how to harness. Indigenous societies knew and well utilized them.
Well,
but we're just catching up.
We interviewed Dr. Andrew Wild in the past on spontaneous healing, talking about that whole aspect of how it's unexplainable from
and that every doctor he knows, he said, had those cases in their files.
Yeah.
I've asked many doctors too, and they all have them.
Yeah.
What are some of yours that you've seen in your practice?
It's interesting. It's hard to get the follow-up on some of them. Yeah. But the one thing I'll say in terms of the divination, which has always surprised me, is somebody might come and they've got pancreatic cancer or something, and that's got a dismal prognosis. And then I throw the bones, and I'm always scared because and the bones say this person's going to be fine. And I say, look, you're going to be fine. Go and have the surgery. You'll be okay. And then I don't even see them again, and I don't know whether they passed on or whatever. And then I remember once I was giving a lecture, and somebody was standing at the side door. And at the intermission, we have a break. I said, well, why don't you just come and have a seat? No, he said, it was a woman. She said, no, I wanted to just talk to you because everybody said that my prognosis was terrible and I'm fine. And the bones were right. So clearly there are paid people who get that you don't hear about. They don't contact you. But I remember there was one guy who had very advanced prostate cancer. And it was like, when you told him about it, it was like you'd given him a parking ticket. It just didn't affect him in the least. He didn't have insurance. He was Canadian, so he didn't have Medicare. And he only came periodically, and he was doing just great. I mean, it was 5, 6, 7 years. He was in remission. He made a big mistake, is that he moved back north for whatever reason. I lost touch with him, but I don't think he did well with the move. So it's a very critical balance. It's like, even I think with the chemo, it may be that you have a space remission, but does it last? How is it 5 years down the road? How long does the Vatican, actually, that's the only place I know where they've documented, they've got like 70 cases documented by the Vatican Medical Commission of spontaneous remission. I presume they're following them, from year to year, but I don't know that, but there's no question it happens, but it is a little bit like water running uphill. It doesn't happen too often.
But it seems like those are the cases we should study.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
The placebo effect, why aren't we employing that more?
Yeah.
Extra booster. Two questions. One is, I love the question, and this is one of my favorite questions I ask everybody. What do I not know to ask you that I should know? And
I think I should rephrase what I need to ask you that I need to know.
and then
As I listened to you, and I thought it was fun because Fred in the chat room said, "I want you to be my doctor," and I'm sure a lot of people are hearing you and saying, "Move to my town because my guy doesn't get it." And so, what's happening in the world of the MD world? I mean, is it kind of like a professor without tenure that you're afraid to speak up because you're going to lose your status within the medical community? Or how many? There's more and more openness to things like meditation. They're taking baby steps. Okay, yeah, meditation can't hurt you. You can meditate. Yes, you can take some herbs, but be careful. And where you stand, are you under a lot of criticism, or are you more where the mainstream is going to end up? Is that the direction things are going to go?
Thank you, because that reminds me of my other question. You really honor Western medicine. It has its own miracles. It has its own place and advancement. I mean, it's pretty substantial.
Right.
The trick is to marry
we're not
the
denying
two.
medicine.
Yeah, exactly.
Western medicine, we're saying the opposite. Can it be integrated more? Integrated medicine, where's it going?
But it's its own set of miracles.
Yeah.
The technology,
Yeah, it's a very good question because the reason I think that I'm respected in town because I do a good job with my Western medicine, and that's important because and that's one of the reasons I stay in it because I have access to the computer. I have privileges. I can operate when I want to. I don't do, I need to select my cases very carefully. And, I'm respected. So they can't say this guy, he's just lost it. They're not capable of saying that. But in reality, it was a very good question because somewhere years ago, Cottage Hospital asked me to check into alternative medicine. But they've got a board that's very right-wing and very conservative and so on. So I went to Boston and where I did the workshop, but it's like you were talking about. That's what Larry Dossey called second era medicine. First era medicine is what I learned in medical school. That's cause and effect. Your appendix is rotten. You take out the appendix, you get better. That's basically. Now it's gone to the second era medicine, which is energetic medicine, which is, Chinese medicine, acupuncture, meditation, all that stuff. You are dealing with what's called third year medicine, which is medicine not localized in space and time. And when I sent a question out to the doctors, we sent it out to, would they support an integrative medicine? I formulated the question in terms of those three phases. Just about everybody said the third thing was absolute nonsense. It's witchcraft. It's not. They were all supportive of it, of the second one. Some of them might have been supportive of the third one, but they didn't want to say it.
Yeah.
And then a few years ago, they were the head of the chief of medicine at Cottage Hospital said, we're not doing enough variation. The California board wants us to be more open to other things. Will you come and talk about your Sangoma experiences? But he qualified, just know that I know this is a bunch of nonsense, but I have to do this. Well, we couldn't get CME credits for it. So that was out of the question. So that tells you, if anything, the conservative, like everywhere else, is getting more conservative. But then there's a small percentage of people that are more like you and me and the audience.
It's a growing percentage.
Yeah, it's a growing percentage, but they're not that vocal. But when I gave the talk, I was very careful. I tried to talk about it like in quantum physics. We're really talking about a quantum effect here. It's, there's nothing unusual about it. One guy got up afterwards and I peppered the audience with people I knew would support me. So there was a good turnout. but there were a lot of them were doctors I knew would not, would be in support, and nurses I knew would be in support. This one guy just stood up and he had a tirade. He said, "How dare you come into this conference and talk such crap?" And he just went off. It actually was good for me because it sort of polarized the guys that were wondering about it. They came into my camp because it was so outrageous. But no, there's still a very strong conservative thing, and it's getting more strong. The universities are now, we're having trouble, I think, in Santa Barbara with City College, with the psychology department. They want data. They want to be able to prove stuff, and that's always a problem.
But I imagine that you have this experience like we do, where people, after a presentation to a whole variety of people, we have people come up to us and secretly say, I couldn't say this in the group, but da 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 da.
Right.
Yeah.
Constantly. That's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. And I'm imagining the same is true for you.
Yeah.
That's true for me. And the nurses often, if they're having surgery or something, they'll come for bones, or I'll give them some talisman to protect them. Because nurses and doctors are vulnerable to trickster spirits. There are a lot of trickster spirits that haunt the halls of the hospitals that do not like doctors because they've had bad experiences, and they're earthbound spirits. And I believe Murphy's Law is, when a doctor comes in for an operation, weird things start to happen. Nurses as well, the CEO of the hospital as well. So frequently, those that are receptive, and they wouldn't admit to it, they come and they ask me for some protection if they're going to have an operation or something like that.
Well,
Interesting, because that's a perfect segue.
yeah, because one of the things that you sent to us was the concept of removing spirits that have bad intentions, right? Intrusive intentions. Yeah. Let me throw that slide up, so we can talk about that for a moment, and then we're going to go ahead and have some questions and comments with the community.
Oh, and Fimba, you mentioned that term before. Could you define that?
Fimba is like an exorcism of a spirit, so that in order to do it, the person has to become possessed, and then the spirit that took over this woman's body comes and gets rid of the spirit, so she's no longer in control of her body. We don't have time to show the video, but there might be a slide of her. It's a bit vague, sucking something out of here. She's going into possession, and she's starting to shake. She's sucking something out of my side. And what was interesting, this was during my initiation process. And I, about halfway through it, I took a group to visit Sangomas in the northern part of South Africa. And I was here with a group. And an old man, he actually is sucking something out of my side. You can see the imprint of my body there. And she's in a complete possessed state. And I don't know what was going on, but somebody was sucking at something about me. And then you don't see it in this, but after she sucks something out, somebody comes out with a whisk like this, and he says, shoo, shoo, shoo. He wants to be sure that spirit isn't in her now, and he's making sure it hasn't gone into her. But while I was being initiated, PH, my teacher, had a dog. It was a female dog that had a huge tumor that was extruding from its vagina. And PH said to me, well, I had two dog lovers there, and the one was being initiated, the other one was filming me. And they said, please, Dave, put this dog down. So I asked PH to permission. He said, no, you can put the dog down. And I had a medical kit with me, and I had morphine, I had Valium, I had other drugs, and I couldn't find a vein in the dog because it was so sick and emaciated. I injected the thing directly into the heart. And the dog stopped breathing, and I thought all's good. I couldn't take a pulse or anything. But then it started to come round again, because dogs don't respond like humans. It would have killed a human, what I gave it into the heart. The dog came around. I didn't have any more medicine left. So I had to strangle the dog. And it felt terrible. I wanted to finish the job. So afterwards, I went to PH, and I said, look, I don't feel right. I feel something's wrong. Can you do a healing on me? Can you cleanse me? He said, no, you're fine. You did the right thing. You're fine. So the one guy and I, we went to bury the dog somewhere away from the homestead. And then I forgot about it. I didn't forget. I mean, that night there was a hose pipe in the garden, and I went and washed myself. But I didn't think twice about it. And when I went to the Sangoma through the bones, he didn't do the Femba. He said, you have a spirit inside of you. This woman must do Femba on you. And this was with a group. And she sucked out when I said, what happened? Because I couldn't see anything. Somebody said to me, she was walking like a dog. They said that she sucked out the spirit of a dog from you. So this was 3 weeks later after that happened, and nobody knew what had happened except me. And the Sangoma knew there was something intrusive, and that you can read in the bones. Now that's very sophisticated. You have to be very specialized to do Femba, very dangerous work. You never do it alone. You always do it in community, and you don't know what the hell you're sucking out. Here, it wasn't really anything too terrible. But, even the people who do exorcisms, like the Catholics, and I think the Church of England, they're at terrible risk for themselves, because they're dealing with satanic forces. And the ancestors said, you not to touch any of those things. That's not your job. Mm-hmm. But I do it through ritual. And frequently, one of the most important things I see in the bones are being haunted by intrusive spirits of their loved ones who need forgiveness, like a father or mother or grandfather or grandmother who's abused the child, either emotionally or physically or even sexually. Wow. And until that person is forgiven, they won't leave, because the karmic implications of what they've done is so horrendous, because the laws up there are much more strict than down here. They are faced with the prospect of coming back again to do that whole lifetime all over again, either with an alcoholic syndrome or being abusive to a child or so on. But forgiveness will release the spirit from that particular karmic imprint. It's huge. And this is why unfinished business is so important, is forgiveness must happen before death, because when it happens after death, you've got to come to somebody who's expert in doing it. And probably I'd say that's probably the most important thing that I do today. The work I do is intrusive spirits that need forgiveness. They're hanging around the living. And you'd be amazed how much witchcraft and sorcery there is in America. I remember my teacher saying to me, I said, look, I just want to do bones. I don't want to deal with dark forces. And he laughed. He said, you'll be dealing with it whether you like it or not. Yeah. And I'm doing, in Santa Barbara, I'm getting people who bewitched, often by their own families.
Like not intentionally, but subconsciously?
Subconsciously, but sometimes intentionally. There's somebody who, it comes from an evil inclination, somebody who's got an evil heart, who's envious. If you think of the 10 Commandments, there's one commandment I always wondered about it. Why mustn't I be jealous? It says, do not covet your neighbor or anything that belongs to your neighbor. If you have an evil inclination and you have dark spirits that help you, you can get what you want from somebody, or you can prevent somebody from getting what they want, or you can sell your craft to somebody else and get rich. And it works. People don't believe that it works unless you believe in it, but it works whether you believe in it or not. And so a lot of people have got knowledge. They can go online, they can learn things. The minute you have that inclination, it's very easy to adopt a dark spirit. I remember I was going with a tracker, and you can stop me if we're running out of time, but a Shangaan tracker next to the Kruger National Park. The plants around that area are very different to the plants in my area where I had my healing center. And I wanted to learn some of the plants that were in this other place, the other ecosystem. So we were hiking together with this tracker in big game country, and his mother was a Sangoma. And he knew all the plants, he knew all about the work she did, but he was a devout Christian. So he knew it was important, but he didn't want to go down that road. And while we were talking about medicines for witchcraft and so on, he said, anybody can become a witch. All you have to do is go to another witch and buy a snake from that person. In other words, you need an evil inclination. And what are you buying? The snake is like an evil spirit. Like, when you dream a poisonous snake in the dream, it may mean that you've got an evil spirit around you. So it presents, often things present as snakes in African tradition. A python is a good snake. It represents the ancestors. A mamba is be careful. There's something out to get you, you know. So when you see rattlesnakes or dream rattlesnakes or cobras or whatever, it could be a warning. So he said that when you buy your snake, you can have whatever you want. You can have women, you can have power, you can have money, but you have to feed your snake. And if you don't feed your snake, the snake's going to eat your family, going to eat your children, going to eat your wife, it's going to eat you. So you basically sell your soul to the snake, to the dark side. But you get a lot of power, you know, and it's ubiquitous. It's all over. It's not just in Africa. They're much better at it in Africa. I mean, the witches
Well,
there.
look at the lessons of Star
You've
Wars.
read the book. You've read the book.
Yeah, look at the lessons of Star Wars, right? And so, I mean, we play these out in our culture. We play these lessons out, and they resonate with us. Somehow we know all this.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why you're right about the Marvel things. You know, it's the hero archetype. It's the same thing wherever you look.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
These lessons.
That will be.
Yeah.
Beware
of the superpowers that you adopt, right?
Exactly.
And know that they're all just on loan.
Exactly. I was going
And that we have a responsibility with them, right? We come here, we have responsibilities. And it's just better to show up, meet your destiny, and get on with it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And spinning your wheels.
You have to do it for its own sake. You know, it cannot be for an ulterior motive. It's got to be for its own sake.
Be
so
altruistic
you don't want
to the universe.
Loot financially. You know, you're a non-profit. You don't ask for any financial reward. You know, you're doing it for its own sake. That's incredibly important karmically. Once there's an agenda, it's still better you do it than you don't do it. But once there's an agenda, you might call it spiritual materialism, which kind of like a lot of yoga has become these days, you know. It's not so much about yoga, it's about the posture and the crops and the music that's played and all the rest of it.
Let's forget the entire history and all this and all of the intricacies of the spirituality. It's all about physical exercise. Yeah, I know. Well, speaking of yoga, I want to ask Fred Smith, associate professor from the University of Iowa, who's a Vedic scholar, who's listening in on the conversation and have some of his comments and discussion so far, where we've come and where we're going.
And Fred has gone around India looking at real interesting rituals.
Trance states.
And told us about them.
Hi, Fred.
Hey, Fred, and Papageno, the parrot.
Thank you. I really loved your presentation, and it really dovetails with a lot of my own work on deity and spirit possession in India, which I wrote a big book about this about 15 years ago, and I went all over India and did probably more documentation on this than anybody, but it's just really makes a lot of sense to me what you're saying, just on every level, and I just don't even know where to begin commenting, but because I've kind of noted a lot of stuff down, but just, I mean, suffice it to say that, and something you just said, the most recent thing reminded me that there's a lot of stuff that goes on even in the US. An article that Robert Orsi wrote maybe 25 years ago. He was a professor at Harvard. I think he's at Northwestern now. On snake spirits in Georgia, where he did some documentary work on this, of cursing and placing diseases in people. So there is a lot of this. I mean, we know very little about this because people like Orsi's work is very unusual kind of documentary work in the US. But were you saying that there's a lot of this stuff that's deliberate or just kind of happenstance or accidental or just because of bad vibes floating around in a person's house or what?
It's I think like it could be not deliberate, but the fact is you have the intention that's evil, like the evil eye is not wishing somebody well. The evil tongue, you can destroy somebody with the evil tongue. They're all different forms of witchcraft in my eyes. And then the evil inclination usually implies that you have it, whether you know you have power or not is irrelevant, because if you are giving free will to the spirit world, the dark side of the spirit world, to work on your behalf, they can come in. But it'll be more powerful if you do rituals to the dark side. So if you think of the gangs, the Mexican gangs, they have altars to Satan and Lucifer and all the rest of it. And they have tremendous power. Satanic cults have tremendous power. I actually knew a guy who's a recovering Satanist. And he said, you won't believe the kind of things these guys could do. But they do rituals that honor the dark side, and they're professionals in the work that they do. It's like the mafia. They're professionals. They have integrity in what they do. They're very committed. And for instance, just not to horrify you, but the worst form of witchcraft in South Africa is when you take that to the nth degree by taking a human organ from somebody, especially if they're alive, to use for your medicine. So that's a horrifying thing. But if you are prepared to go to those lengths, you can pretty much do whatever you want. Now, there's somebody with an evil inclination. There are those, I remember Larry Dossey talking about it. A woman told her that she had a relative who used to say, that guy I don't like. I really don't like that guy. And he seemed like an innocuous guy. And then something terrible would happen to that person, but more than once. So whether that person just had signed on without knowing about it by his intentions and his actions and his evil inclination to the spirit world, to the dark side, whether he was actually invoking it, I'm not sure I can answer that. But there's no question that the witch and the sorcerer is the traitor in the gates. They don't want you to know who they are, because then they can do their work unopposed. You don't know you're being bewitched. You can reverse any hex. Any hex can be reversed, but if you don't know you've been hexed, then you can't do it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
complicates it.
Yeah, it does to some extent. I mean, I've seen everything, let me tell you.
yeah,
Not taking organs from humans, but not too far from that.
yeah,
I've done a lot of research at the biggest spirit healing center in India, which is about maybe 6 or 7 hours from Delhi in North India, between Jaipur and Agra. And what I've seen there is, it's like going inside somebody's dark closet, and a dark psychic closet. But I've seen healings going on there also. And as you pointed out, what they call pratikriya in India, which is counter possession, of one person being diagnosed as possessed by some kind, usually an ancestral spirit or two, and then somebody else will be in the kind of spirit healing center, would have access to relationship with possession by a positive spirit, and then they would work it out in a very amazing kind of psychodramatic form. There's kind of an internal, there's a kind of a psychoanalysis going on, like a talking psychoanalysis between, from the healing spirit to the possessing spirit. They never use the word evil, ever. It's like these are wayward spirits. They're not evil spirits. They're wayward. They've gotten off the path due to, bunch of different possible reasons.
And then the purpose is to help them back to
The purpose is to help the spirit back into positive territory.
Yeah.
And then that spirit will leave that individual.
And my understanding with the ancestors, they say that, and I think this is in line with some of the, your beliefs and the Buddhists, is that somebody who goes down to the lower realms, the hungry ghosts, so to speak, the ancestors say that essentially you get to a point where you are incapable of redemption. I'm not talking about an ancestor who comes into your body because you've got a broken aura, I'm talking, you're quite right about that. And but there are evil possessions. The Catholic Church would agree with that. But in this case, the ancestor would say the only way this spirit, that your cravings get worse when you're in the lower realms. Your alcohol addiction, your desire for sex, your gambling addiction, all these things get worse, and you cannot realize them. So what sometimes happens is that this spirit comes out of the lower realms, the demonic realms, because it can't reincarnate. It's not allowed to reincarnate. Sort of given up that thing. And it possesses somebody who's got a broken aura. It couldn't possess anybody in this audience. It has to be somebody who's got a broken aura, who's been abused in some terrible way. And then they can enjoy sentient pleasures. And this is what I witnessed with the Sangomas. Some of the spirits that possessed them, they wanted something that they didn't have on the other side, like they want to smoke a cigarette or they want to drink a water. One of them wanted marijuana, because it used to smoke marijuana. So that's a different sort of thing. That's somebody who's doing service from the other side, bumping up their karmic brownie points in a sense to improve their karmic profile through their own cultural medium. But I would agree with what you say, and I think that's very interesting, that there's the psychoanalysis going on, which is great. But there are evil spirits, and I think that's what the Catholic Church deals with. The interesting thing about it, Larry King interviewed somebody who was an exorcist, and he was asking really good questions. And he related a story, and I may have forgotten the details, of this spirit who possessed a small woman, an elderly woman, and she had multiple spirits. There wasn't one of them. So she obviously had a broken aura. And they could get rid of one and they couldn't get rid of the other. But the important thing about this woman, she was a flimsy, it took 4 men to hold her down. They couldn't control her physically.
Wow.
So it's like somebody on meth, there's something that's going on there that's way beyond anything else. And the interesting thing about what the exorcist said, is these people do not live long because they're very difficult to exercise and it's very dangerous to do it anyway. But I think there's a whole spectrum. The spectrum you're talking about, there's a spectrum in Africa, which the reality is that there were a lot of apartheid atrocities that were committed in Africa. And I'm sure there were satanic rituals done there as they've done everywhere else. And there were places where witchcraft, or there were witches or sorcerers that were doing terrible things. And I remember my foreman, whose grandfather was a Sangoma, he initiated while I was there. And his teacher said, before you go to cleanse a house, because she was getting him to cleanse houses, this is not even exercising a spirit. She said, you have to throw the bones 3 times. You have to throw when you're at home to see if it's safe. If it's safe, then you throw before you enter the property. And if it's safe, you enter, and then you throw before you go into the house. And then if it says, okay, then you go into the house. So they're talking about some serious stuff. And Laura Lee she's read the book. I mean, I've had the most crazy things happen to me, which are by the dark side, and including having black mambas sent to bite me and spitting cobras sent to bite me and other stuff. There's true evil in the world, and unfortunately it's not that common, but just like there's true evil wherever you see it, they're jealous people who do bad things, but they're evil people who are more satanic in nature, who do bad things. The best movie I've ever seen is The Devil's Advocate. It's a really good movie to go and see what.
So how does someone protect themselves? And of course, pay attention to your intuition, right?
Correct.
Pay attention. Your intuition is also kind of an early
The
alarm
average
system.
Westerner, person, how would you protect yourself?
I don't think the average Western person has to worry. It's only when you have something that they don't want you to have that you have to worry. The ancestors call it a costly compliment. So you are at risk because of the work you do. But I'm at greater risk because I get rid of intrusive spirits. I'm dealing with a spiritual mafia. I'm doing things, I'm reversing witchcraft. which you don't do, which is a good thing. I wouldn't advise you to do it. If I'd been informed consent when I was initiating, I may not have gone the whole way, because it's not fun. The other thing that's very interesting is that the trouble with the computer, because frequently there are things that happen, even though you can see it on the computer, something flipped the switch that made it difficult.
That he didn't intentionally switch.
I've had my things crash completely. When I give my talks live, I do three things. I take my own computer in case the computer crashes. I take a hard copy as well, and I take an extra memory stick. So there's going to be opposition if you become visible to the dark side. But if you're not coming up against the dark side, which you're not, you're just talking about the light, then you're going to be fine.
I want to bring up another question, in that, Fred, you've told us about rituals you've seen of an entire community in India where there's some dysfunction, and the ritual unravels the dysfunction. And I was thinking that it really dysfunction is passed from generation to generation to generation, right? Abuse and alcohol and predation. There's just things that are passed along. A lot of people are working hard to undo their generational abuse. You find a lot of people out there speaking, I had to do this and this and this to overcome it. A lot of it was through the self-help movement, through ritual, through medicine of the energetic third era type and all this. So it's interesting to me that it seems to take these extra special steps to really undo something that runs that deep in families. Your thoughts on, you've seen it in India, you've seen it in Africa. It's interesting that maybe that should be employed more, this energetic stuff. And I'm also heard from organ donor recipients who, and I've seen case studies on this. Somebody who never smoked or never ate fast food, but suddenly had these addictions, to find out that the donor, this was their addiction, and now they're having it visited in their body. Could an energetic cleansing alleviate that? Does some imprint of the personality come with the organ?
With the organ.
Yeah, can you speak to that? Multiple personalities, or you mentioned, Can you address it to some of the interesting phenomenon we've seen in our culture, and shed some new light on that?
Well, as I've said before, probably to this group, that at these big spirit healing centers in India, family therapy is de rigueur. They will not even allow people inside their doors unless there's at least 2 or 3 members of the family there. The idea being that if one person in a family is afflicted, then the whole family is in one way or another afflicted, not just with these psychological syndromes, but with the actual spirits themselves. Mm-hmm. And when these exorcist teams who do these psychodramatic kinds of therapy begin working with one of these families, somebody in that family is going to go into a trance state. It's usually not the person who's primarily afflicted, whom they've brought in, but it will be somebody there. Mm-hmm. And then they will begin to get at the bottom of it. The person will begin, there's this way that they have of communicating directly with the spirit, whether it has a reputation of being evil or whatever. But there's pretty harsh methods that they use in their dialogues. It's, these people would not be licensed by the AMA, let me tell you. And but it's, some of my work there I did with a psychiatrist from Finland. He has practices in both Helsinki and Paris, and he'd been going to that place for like 25 years. And I asked him, hey, why do you come to this place all the time? It's really macabre, dark, He said, it's because they can accomplish in a weekend what it takes him 25 years to do in Helsinki.
Oh, yeah.
So. I could see another form of ecotourism. Bring the whole family, to one of these healing centers and deal with it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So cut the cords. Yeah. Oh, interesting. It's interesting the relationship between
Yeah.
two very distant.
ancient civilization,
Yeah.
civilizations that go back
Yeah.
all the way. Yeah.
Because but we have one human blueprint, right?
Right.
One family. We're one family.
You know,
And there's various ways that are dealing with the same dynamics.
I remember Laura and I's brother-in-law had acquired a huge collection of African masks, and he was not into necessarily researching. He thought it was artwork, but he just said, "Oh my God, there's two." And he's not one of these type of people to say this, but he said, "These have to go. The energy, there's something here. I don't know what it is, but it's not meant to be in my home, and I'll be donating
found
these
it
as
good.
fast as possible." You know, and so, but I'm not just picking on Africa, but I'm just saying that that point is that there's that duality of energy that you have to be careful as you proceed and what you're bringing into your life.
But look at Picasso,
yeah.
who put African masks around his various chateaus
yeah.
and called them sentries overseeing his artwork.
Yeah.
And from which Cubism, was born.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
And,
let
and
me
I think
just-
the medicine of healing and of divination and the things that you're talking about is something that we all want to subscribe to. We want to also, knowledge is power. You need to know that this other part of things exist, and you have to have an awareness. I know Dr. Goodman spent significant time and research into possession trance prior to the creation of the posture work. And she was very, very careful with what she did. And, you know, the Cuyamonga Institute sits on land of an indigenous culture, an old Pueblo villages on her land, and she was very careful not to disturb it, not to offend it. She knew the things that you're talking about is something that you have to take into consideration. And yeah.
Well,
But
then
let,
I'll
let me
just.
let me just add one thing. I'd like to add just one thing to what I said a minute ago, and that's
Yeah,
that-
go ahead.
so I asked my psychiatrist friend there, so why is it that this can be more effective in a weekend than what you can do in 25 years in Europe? And he said it's because they can, through this kind of possession and counter possession, and getting to the real spirit in all senses of the term spirit of the affliction, what they can eliminate, especially with all the family there, is the one thing that they can almost never do in Europe. And that is they can eliminate guilt. It's not your fault.
Ah,
Oh,
And
wow.
once you get to guilt, then it's easy to work with the spirit that's underlying the whole thing. It's not gripping onto that person and bringing this whole sense of guilt upon the individual from the family. That's okay. I won't take up any more time with that. That's
So
the
you
short
can
story.
save face and change and do the
Yes.
work and let it go.
yeah.
And I think there's energetics to this too.
Yes.
Yeah, a cleansing energetically. David, your thoughts on that?
Thank you so much, Fred.
think
You
it's
always
Yeah.
contribute so much. Yeah.
incredibly important. You know, the other thing about guilt and shame, especially shame, is a crippling emotional force. And you cannot actually heal, you know, if you don't believe you deserve to be healed because you're guilty or shameful or
That
anything.
was
like
Right.
that.
point,
You're
yeah.
going to accept
Yeah.
that negativity as your fate or your punishment, right?
But you know, what the other speaker was talking about is very similar in a sense. It's just obvious different cultures are slightly different, but all of that is incredibly valuable. And I think the thing is, it's done in community, which is so powerful. You never see one Sangoma doing Femba on his own. There's a whole bunch of people drumming, and the
Right.
other family members may be there, and the Sangoma will trance, and the Femba guy will trance, and the others might trance. So it's a little different, but not that different. The Bushmen always in community, the Native Americans as well, you know, originally always, it's a communal thing where there's a lot of coherence, which is really important. But the other thing I'll say about guilt is that guilt is much, witchcraft is much more powerful if you have done something wrong. So somebody who screwed somebody over, you know, maybe he slept with his wife, or he cheated him in business, or he destroyed his business, he might go to a witch. And then the power of nocebo is the opposite of placebo, the power of belief to hurt, harm, or kill you. He knows he's been bewitched. The power of nocebo and the fact that he is bewitched by a powerful witch, and in addition, he feels he deserves to be bewitched at some level, can be as good as a death sentence. Those are the people who actually die from it. It can be reversed, but when there's guilt, the speaker was absolutely correct. You've got to get rid of the guilt first, and then before you can do the healing.
Well, I think that's why intent, and you talked about an open and a pure heart, is so important.
Right.
Because then you can be transparent, right? Then you can be that hollow bone, and then you're not hiding out, right? And then you're. I think that's your intent is so
Right.
important, and your integrity.
And why
Yeah.
you would continue because you once you learn this about these aspect to it, you could very much say, okay, I'm going to go back to Western medicine, and I'm not going to include this because I don't know the power of it. But you took the steps to include it and learn it properly, be initiated properly, so that you can
Be responsible.
and so that particular effect is only a small slice of the pie to the overall power of the healing, what's available to you through the medicine that you've learned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would be your dearest wish for our society to shift in its worldview? What would you see the key to healing us Westerners?
Yeah.
Well, that's a tough question. I think the first thing would have to be awareness, because without awareness, there can be no motivation to do anything. And how do you promote awareness like you're doing now? You're doing it on a global level. I'm doing it much more on a personal level, more one-to-one level. I think that you're doing and everybody's doing what they need to do, because eventually the message gets through that this isn't working anymore and we've got to change. But the trouble is fear. People are fearful of changing they know. And then, of course, we have, the dark side, forgive me for going there again, but the dark, and it's a battle between light and dark all the time. It's going on at a cosmic level. It's going on down here.
Just like all the
So,
sagas say.
Yeah.
yeah. And then you have people like Putin, you see, he's got soul loss. His soul is gone. He's taken over. He's completely taken over. And there've been other, Hitler, he was a master of the occult. I don't know that Putin is. He's probably just taken over. But take somebody like Idi Amin or Mugabe from Zimbabwe. They have a lot of power. Mugabe is, I think, still alive at 90. No one's taken the guy out. It's like unbelievable. Idi Amin, of course, didn't last that long, but he was very intuitive. He knew when people were going to kill him. He was told by his trickster spirits. So I think what's happening is you don't notice the light that's actually getting more than the dark. We think because the dark is more vocal that it's like this, but it's really like this. So I think we're heading in the right direction. The problem is climate change. So that unless we get rid of that, we're not going to be around to allow the light to go where they're going. And of course, as things get more desperate, then climate change gets worse with wars and all the rest of it. So the fact that it seems like everything is terrible and that there's more dark than light, I think is because of people like you and others that are an insult, you're a reproach to the dark side. They're trying to, so the dark is going to be more exaggerated. They have to fight harder. But I think your question was, it starts with awareness, and awareness comes from meditation, some form of spiritual practice that makes you know that you spun out, that you in flight and fight, you're in monkey mind the whole time. You have to realize I'm not doing well. And it's often a kick in the pants. You get sick, or you lose a job, or you lose a loved one. And then you actually say, well, I've got to change. But it's so slow. But as long as the planet's still around and we don't have an apocalypse, it might take many, many generations, but we're heading in the right direction. I really believe we are. And I think light is more powerful than dark, and love is more powerful than fear. And that we just have to plug on and do our own thing. We can't change people like, the Putins of the world and all the different shades of Putin. And that's the concern.
Yeah.
I think
Exactly.
the story that we tell ourselves, though, in the West, that we've forgotten that all of life is sacred. We've forgotten that there's more than this physical realm, that we've forgotten our own powers, that we've set them aside, that we operate alone. that
It's a world beyond social
yeah,
media.
that here we should succeed, we should be famous, we should be wealthy, we should be that's the goal in life, as opposed to let's find our destiny and open our hearts and show up and do our best. You know, all these lies that we tell ourselves in our society about what we're about what are the goals, about what's expected of us. I see that as working for the dark side. I think the story we tell ourselves.
The isolation, like he was talking,
Yeah.
Dave was
I
talking
think
about.
that we need to wake up. Maybe
but
that's the great
The
challenge.
tribe
Wake
worked
up.
together. The tribe took on these things together. It was not an individual and an individual, and we've become very much individuals.
it's everybody
we don't
or
have
nobody.
a tribe if we don't take
In our
take
final
the step
exam.
to become
Yeah.
right part of a tribe. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And find what you and you alone can do. I mean, we know. We just aren't practicing it as
Yeah.
a society.
Maybe
But,
more and more.
you know, what's his name? Roshi said the fundamental delusion of humanity is to believe I am here and you are out there. You know, it's this duality that we create. But the good news is that, you know, the sages say that this world is just an antechamber for the world to come. That we are living in a 1% universe. There's another 99% universe. So in reality, you know, when I was starting off in my thing, I had a song that said, "Oh, please don't let me take this trip again." You know, we've all had thousands of lifetimes. And we trying to get it right. So I'm just hoping I've got it right enough that I don't have to come back and see the apocalypse. So maybe that's
Roll
the
up your
plan.
sleeves.
Just to
Yeah.
remember that we do the best we can while we're here. We create and we try and heal the planet and do whatever we can. And the wheel of samsara is always turning, you know, the continual cycle of death, rebirth. But people in this audience are in the category that maybe you don't have to come back again if you play your cards right, and you can do more work from the other side. The reality is you're not impotent when you're on the other side. You can do more work from the other side than from this side. You'll be like on super Zoom. You can, you know, you're non-localizing space and time. Yeah. It's
You
not,
know,
it's not hopeless. It's not hopeless.
it's not
Right,
hopeless,
not
but I
at
want
all.
to say one thing that you helped me really come to terms with. And you describe in your book, The Source, about sacrificing a goat and a chicken for your initiations. And of course, sacrifice and killing an animal, you know, it doesn't sit well with so much of it. But I have to think back and go, humankind has been hunting from time immemorial. That's just part of the game plan. Yes, we do eat a lot of plants, and plant medicine is so good for us. But you pointed out something key. You said this was done ritually. This was done so the spirit of that animal can live on in this ritual, in this sacred work. How can we in our Western mistreat animals and have factory farming and slaughter animals so abusively, and then go to the grocery store and buy their meat without any thought to where this came from? Isn't that worse? And I think, yeah, we have to be accountable for how we're treating one another and the web of life and the planet. We need to wake up on that. We are. There's so much progress on that, but you know, I just think that our day-to-day practices are just heaping so much abuse on not only those around us but ourselves.
Yeah.
So
No, you know, there should be no place, you know, for harming animals or plants in a way. You know, we can harvest them and do the rest of it, but we have to even do that consciously.
yeah,
But
or
I
one
think,
another.
yeah, one another.
So,
But
but I think just to have the dialogue is waking up, right? We can
Yeah.
move the dial through dialogue, and we can. And I'm happy that, like the Me Too movement, we're having that across the board for all life, and how
the other thing is not sustainable. You know,
yeah.
we can't keep doing it. So hopefully, people eventually, when you develop the technology and people realize that we can make money out of it, you know, if we can make money out of it and it's sustainable, let's do it. You know, especially if we can make more money out of it. And that's what we have to rely on, sadly, that, you know, there has to be an ulterior motive for the people to change what their habits are. And as long as that it happens, that's good for everybody. But usually it's going to be, you know, spiritual materialism. You know, that's it. It's good,
I
but it's Yeah.
I want to mention that one of our guests in the past just passed, Hazel Henderson.
Right, that's right.
And really a futurist, and really calling for a revision of the economic story that we tell ourselves.
Right.
Such important work that she's done for decades. And she talks about the golden rule societies, where we do unto others that we would want done unto us. And we have made that shift that you're alluding to, David, that it's all about commerce and wealth and individual wealth, and that our economics have also been so skewed in terms of what's valuable, what's true wealth, and how do we go about supporting that, sustaining that. So I just wanted to honor Hazel.
Right.
And-
I'm really
and
good.
for all the
We
work
just
that she
interviewed
does.
her a couple months ago, and so her passing is definitely
Yeah.
a loss. And we interviewed her alongside of William Halal, professor from Georgetown University, who wrote a book about the emerging global
Washington
consciousness. George
University.
Washington. I'm sorry. What did I say?
Yeah,
Doesn't
never mind.
matter.
Yeah.
But there's an emerging global consciousness. So it's also we have these trails that also can offer us opportunity to be optimistic and positive about the future, and that we can make changes and that we can be a part of that change. It just seems like
Yeah.
an uphill climb. Let's face it. But
Well, it's like, okay, like Buckminster Fuller used to talk about the trim tabs, and how you can take a huge ocean liner and just with a tiny little trim tab, angle it differently,
Right.
and slowly the boat will move into another direction.
Yeah.
It feels like we're on the boat, right? And we're all being trim tabs,
yeah.
trying to shift gears. And we'll eventually get there if we
Right.
don't run out of time, like you point out.
yeah.
So be the trim tab that you want to be in life.
Yeah.
For the world, right? I so appreciate your work, David. You have dared to go where so few have gone in our society, and done so as a doctor with credentials, and maintain both sides of the fence, right? You walked in two worlds, and that's a very hard thing to do. So we appreciate those who are also keeping the indigenous ways alive and renewed and reactivated and dispensed for us to better understand who we are and where do we come from and where are we going, and how do we navigate this world. So appreciate all the work that you do.
Conversation with you is good medicine.
Yes. Do we have other thoughts,
Well,
other comments?
Tony has his
Speak
hand
up
up.
now.
So Tony Hull is an
Yeah.
associate professor of astronomy at the University of New Mexico, and we're going to add him to the discussion real quickly here. Hello, Tony.
Well, Paul,
Another scientist who's
David,
also a
thank-
mystic.
Thank you. It's a really interesting discussion. As a former Santa Barbarian, or Santa Barbarian, maybe I should say, I'm not surprised that you're there and your practice is in Santa Barbara. But are there practices like this with others doing similar things, or is Santa Barbara the epicenter in the United States?
Yeah.
And I have a follow-up question after that.
He wants to know if there's somebody in
You could do a
Albuquerque.
bone reading by phone.
Is there an Albuquerque doctor that you know?
There are a few, but they're really practicing second era medicine in the physicians. But I
Yeah.
think there's a reservoir of non-medical people
Right.
that are very powerful, psychics and healers and all sorts of things, as I'm sure there are in Sedona or some of these other places.
Right.
So Santa Barbara isn't the epicenter. It's the most expensive place in America at the moment. So it's getting a little bit polluted. So it might be the epicenter of wealth and, the rich and famous. But there's also the epicenter of a very strong collection of powerful people, which is great.
Yeah.
Not so much in the medical community, except for the second era medicine people.
And I have a question that's associated with this. You've mentioned this is sort of the third tier of integrative medicine, or maybe part of something called that. And what you've described seems to be highly deterministic. Well, I'm sure the big pharma would hate this, but is it not possible to create a research design to validate this to a much wider audience? It seems that something's deterministic. There should be questions that can be asked and answered in a repeatable way, and statistical or Monte Carlo analysis be done to validate.
Ah,
I mean, to validate third era medicine,
Yes.
like double-blind studies. That's a very important question. I don't know if I'm really getting your question 100%, but correct me if I'm not.
No, you're right. You're right on.
Yeah, okay. The thing about it is when you try to introduce things that measure it, it pushes it away, because in a sense, what you're saying, you're trying to prove something that maybe can't be proven. Einstein said not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. So I don't know if Uri Geller was a fake, but it seemed as if Uri Geller was able to bend things and do telekinesis. But when they put him under a searchlight with Stanford professors and all the rest of it, trying to validate what he did, he failed. And I think it's a bit like that person who came for his bones, who wanted to have proof of what's going on, or didn't believe what was going on. I think it's that whole issue of trust and faith, and maybe it will be very hard to even document it. For instance, I know my ancestor, when I do divination, doesn't want technology in there because it interferes with the energy. So just like I think the dark forces can interfere with the energy in the Zoom connection, I think that people's intentions, people's doubts, people's belief systems that are studying this, because you can't have a guy like me studying it, because I'm biased, I'm impartial. So it will be subjected to the kind of people who are scientists and are trying to prove something that maybe they can't prove, or even if they could, the ancestors or the guides are not going to come to the party because they're all assholes. Excuse my term.
And
Yeah.
you
why,
need different
why would I hang
instruments
out
to
with these
measure it
people if
by.
they don't believe in me and try and prove myself that I'm doing something,
Right.
Well,
Right.
I'm not sure you need scientific instruments to do this, but you have a number of different cases. Maybe they fall in categories, and
Yeah.
I'm sure that a certain percentage works, and maybe a certain percentage doesn't work, perhaps for the reasons that you've explained to us. Uh, I would think that one could gather data that would be interesting enough that it could get consideration at the same level as the second tier.
Mm.
A
Yeah.
different
You're
set of
right on.
instruments.
You're right on. But let
Hope
me
so.
qualify that, because a couple of things. One is that I'll give you an example. I hike with a guy who's, he's an MIT graduate, and when I talk to him about that stuff, he says, that's not proof. That's not proof. There's a scientist in noetic sciences, I'm trying to remember his name. It'll
Dean
come to
Radin,
me.
probably.
Thank you, Dean Radin, who has tried to prove this, and I think he's very valid, and what the work he does is terrific, and I agree with everything he says. But when you subject it to somebody else who's a scientist, you'll find flaws in the whole system.
Mm-hmm.
There was another guy at Duke University who was the guy who started that center for what was called Peel or something, the non-local information. He was kicked out of the department because they didn't think his science was good enough. When I watched what his stuff did, he was doing stuff that was very interesting and was very provable. But I'll give you one of my examples. I did an experiment. I had a friend, and I think we've got a few minutes. I had a friend who was a very alternative guy who was a doctor in Santa Barbara, and he retired and he took off and he went to the jungle of Ecuador to minister to the Indians, like a Schweitzer kind of a guy. He was an amazing guy. He got funding from Direct Relief International. And whenever he came to town, we would hang out and we would swap notes. And one day I called him up because I heard he was in town. I said, let's have lunch together. His name was Lou. And Lou said, I've got bad news. I've got biliary cancer. I've got liver cancer, and I don't have much time. And, I'm not going to go and have a liver transplant. And I've tried everything and it's not going to work. So I've just reconciled myself. And I asked him, I said, would you like to have a divination? And he said, great, that would be wonderful. So he came to the yurt, I did the divination. It looked like he's an enlightened spirit. Everything looked perfect for him. He was going to a much better place. And then I thought, I'll ask him a favor. I said, Lou, I would like to do an experiment to talk to people who are in my audience who don't believe what I do is true. And I said, would you try and come to somebody in a dream and visit them to show that there is a spirit world and that spirits can actually transmit messages? And he said, sure, I'll be happy to do anything you want if I can. It's not to say he could do it. I said, hey, we have to do it in such a way that people are you can't come to me because they won't believe me. You can't come to anybody that I know because then they will dispute it. You must come to somebody that you don't know and that doesn't know you. And that was Mary Ellen Kelly, the woman I mentioned recently, who was because she was an incredible channel. If he could get through to anybody, he would get through to Mary Ellen. But I said, you can try two people. You can try Adrienne, that Laura knows because she's spoken to her many times on the phone. You go to Adrienne because she's also very good. She gets dreams for me, but she does know me, and she knows you. So actually, I don't think she knew Lou. I said, you can go to Adrienne or you can go to Mary Ellen. So he said, great, I'll do my best. So poor Lou passed on, and I waited for him to come because he said he was going to come to Adrienne. Because Adrienne and I share dreams every morning when we start the practice. And I would come and I never said a word to Adrienne about anything. And then one day she came into the office and she said, I had a dream about Lou Netzer last night. And I said, oh, really? How did he appear? Now, we made an arrangement, Lou and I, that he was to come with a special message that, so that people couldn't say, oh, so he came in a dream, but he had to come with something which would be unique. I've got meditation beads around my neck, these ones, and he showed me it. I'll come with my beads and she'll see the beads. Now, depending on how good a channel you are, you will get more or less information. So Adrienne said, this was an amazing dream. It wasn't a dream about Lou, it was a visitation. He was there. And I said, well, tell me more detail. I didn't tell her anything about it. She said, well, he came in a sepia-like color and he was wearing shorts and a poncho and sandals, just like he would be in the jungle. And I said, did he say anything? And he said, did you see any other details in his clothing? Was there anything else? I was trying to not make it obvious. She said, no, that was all I see. So I thought, well, he tried and he came through and that's great, but it's not enough proof. They're going to say, so what? She knew him, she dreamt him. No, it's not a. So I forgot about it and I never talked to anybody about it. I thought, great, I can't use it. Then one day I get a call from Mary Ellen Kelly, like at 6 o'clock in the morning. And she says to me, you know a guy called Lou Netzer? Because she could see their face clearly. She could even sometimes get a name. And I said, yes, I know him. He passed recently. She said, he came to me in a dream and he had a poncho on and short pants and sandals and in a sepia-like color. But she said, the interesting thing about him is he had these beads around his neck. And he said to me, tell Dave, these are not just beads. And he said it 3 times, tell Dave, these are not just beads. And then he left. And then I woke up in the morning, she goes and gets the newspaper and I opened the paper and there in the middle of the paper was a full-page article on Lou Netzer with his work and the people who had taken over his work in Rinabaki in Ecuador. And essentially, then she knew because she saw the pictures, this is the guy who came to me in the dream. And that's why she knew his name. Yeah. So I said that to actually Raymond Moody. And I told him that story. And he said, no, that's not proof. Well, if Raymond Moody doesn't think that's proof, he's the one who did the near-death experience. And he did now the shared crossing experience. And he negated the whole experiment. He said, no, it's interesting, but not proof. And I've said to my MIT guy, that's not proof. So it's like Dean Radin. There are going to be people out there that'll never agree with your data. They'll find a flaw in your method. They'll say this, you failed here. And I believe everything Dean Radin did, but they're not going to. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Paul has a good story here.
Well, I think it's helpful, and I do want to hear Paul's story. And there's also a wonderful question that's come up in the chat that we should probably tackle.
What is that
I'll ta-
question?
I'll-
But one thing I'll mention that in my own field, astronomy, it's not like doing an experiment in a chemistry lab. Something happens and you observe it or you don't observe it with this or that telescope, and it cannot be reproduced exactly as it is.
Yeah.
So when we look at the big questions, we look at big data, and we look at solution space where we have hundreds of thousands of observations and maybe hundreds of thousands of solutions, and you see how they map up next to each other. And is there a trend? This is very much like what we do for weather and climate. So it's not like Newtonian one-dimensional experiments that we're doing. And I think the same thing is true of this world, that it's that you're talking about this problem. It's multidimensional, and multidimensional tools like Bayesian mathematics probably belong in the evaluation that can consider things as they are in many ways. You don't have to have a exact solution every single time. Well, let me step down, and I'd love to hear Fred's
Good
question.
point that you make, Tony.
Oh yeah, we'll ask
Yeah.
that too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well, just well, first of all, on a shameless promotion, if you want to listen to our interview with Dean Radden, it's on our website.
Or Raymond Moody.
Or Raymond Moody, who we just recently interviewed as well. But coming to one of the things that you clicked a story in our brain is that, we had a time where we were doing a lot of in-studio interviews at our radio program, and Eric Geller came to our house, to our studio, and he came in and he's a whirlwind of energy, and he comes in, he sits down at the microphone, and we interview him. He says, well, let me do a few experiments with you. He says, number one, I want everybody that's listening to this show to go find, maybe you have a watch that doesn't work. You have some element in your that's not working. I want you all to go gather those up. So then Laura continued to talk to him for a little bit longer, and he says, okay, does everybody have something? And he says, okay, on three, I'm gonna clap my hands and I'm gonna say work. Hold your watch. I want you to look at it. I want you to shout at your watch and say the word work. So 1, 2, 3, work.
The
All of a
phones
sudden-
light up.
No, well, first of all, the entire studio goes dead. I'm crawling on the floor trying to find plugs and electricity. Like, what's happened? We're off the
All
air.
the lights go.
I've
No,
got
no, I did not assume we were off the air. I kept talking. Just
Yeah.
because lights go off, you kept talking.
all the studio equipment went.
Yeah.
We still had electricity, but we didn't have any studio technology working. And so I'm scrambling underneath the desk and hooking wiring up and doing things. And it comes back on.
No, there's more to that story.
I'm not done.
So we go to break. We
I
go to
know.
break, and so I issued the break. I knew the station was going to fill it in with the news and the ads and
we
blah,
did
blah,
that,
blah.
yeah.
And so I took the opportunity. I said, Yuri, you must make my studio. You did this.
Oh, yeah.
You must make the studio back on. You can't leave us
Yeah,
like that. So he looked sheepish, and then he clapped again, and then everything, bing, 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 lights come on. Okay. That's how I talked to him. I said, you must, don't do
So
this.
then the studio comes back on,
Yeah.
and now the row of lights, the whole phone panel lights up, and people said, my watch is working. My watch is I thought my battery was dead. And another person calls, a third person, a fourth person, and a person calls in and says, my watch is working and it doesn't have a battery in it. And I mean, these are the kind of so whether
We
or
have this on
not
tape.
he's a trickster,
We have this on
where
tape.
is Uri Geller?
No, there were more. So
Okay.
he wanted to bend a key.
Oh yeah.
So Paul goes, well, all right, here's the key. It was our post office key.
Oh yeah.
And he pulls the key, and here's the key laying
finger
flat.
curl. Yeah.
He does this, and it curls.
Yeah.
I watched it.
Yeah.
Okay, another thing he did was
Anyway.
he said, draw a pattern, and I'm going to tell you what it
do
is.
that. Yeah,
So he
he
went to the control room, right? Because I didn't want him anywhere near me. I said, go to the control room with Paul, and I'm drawing a star pattern, and I put one angle of the star very big, but I also did a lot of extra movements because I didn't want him to guess by watching my arm move, because he was right there watching. So I'm doing this, I'm making extra flourishing, and I draw a star pattern. He holds up the exact star pattern, right? I mean, I don't know how he did this. What was the other one he did? There was
I don't know,
another
but
one
the point
he did.
is that it was a side story. But the fact is that he goes down in history probably as a trickster, and there's no way to prove. But that was very odd
Because he did not come to our studio ahead of time and
no, he knew
set up
nothing.
anything.
No.
Yeah.
He just ran. Oh yeah, and then he had to run and catch a cab, and on the way out, he told our friend that was working in the studio
Yeah,
something.
Gary.
Yeah, something.
So Gary cornered him, and Gary was interviewing for a job at Microsoft, and he was unsure of himself. He says, "No, you insist that they hire you."
Yeah.
And Gary did that. Very shy guy.
Yeah.
And he worked there for, had a brilliant career there. Okay.
So there's our side story, but
Okay.
interestingly enough, so it's fun to look at this stuff and see, and this is the good
I
thing.
also went to a psychic surgeon from
That's
the
another-
Philippines, and they say that they have a finger full of fake blood. No, I saw the guy's hands. I saw his hands. He did a mark here. He reached in. I saw his hand go halfway into my chest, over my heart. He pulls out string. He said, your heart has been bound up by these strings. I'm going to ritually bury it. You're free now. And that's when I met Paul and fell in love.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Without that, I don't know that we would have ever gotten to. My life would have been completely different.
I'm a different kind of attachment. Yeah. Right.
So
So back to today's topic. I just wanted to say, and I really like the fact that Tony wants to look for that
I appreciate
element
this.
of documentation. And then the other thing that was
I
referenced.
appreciate what Tony said. He's saying accumulate data. That in astronomy, you cannot go and touch the cosmos, literally, that you are researching. But you can read its data, you can pose some tests, you can accumulate a body of data, you can make hypotheses, you can do the Bayesian, which is what's the most logical. Yeah, you can defer.
And
Why can't we do that with this? I guess we are. I guess this is what ancient people have done, indigenous people have done, is infer, test, work with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And the other thing that came up in the chat room is Fred was recommending that let's do a roundtable discussion on what is spirit. You invite David back, himself,
yes.
Christine. We'll get a group of people together,
I love
and
that.
we'll have a discussion. There's never going to be one solid answer, but what you do is you
have
get
our
all
little
these different
symposiums right
branches of discussion to go around the table.
Are you game, David? You want to join this
Oh,
panel
anytime.
discussion?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah,
for
we'll
it?
find a
Okay.
time. We're booked pretty much for the next 8 weeks, but we'll find a time.
Okay.
Good. Well, good suggestion,
you.
Fred. And I want to thank everybody. Is there any final follow-up question at this point? From
You better get on the microphone and ask it.
No, I'm asking you have a
me?
follow-up question.
Yeah.
Yeah. She usually does. I want to say thank you to everybody that's participated today. You've brought in some unique insight, things that most of us will never have access to otherwise, and that's important for us. And you've also given us the balance to be aware, to have knowledge that there are these other elements, forces, balancing things out, and you have to have an awareness of that as you go
Follow
forward.
your intuition, do the
But-
protections, go to some specialists,
And-
right?
and-
Gather data. But I want to say that the
We're not-
spirits are benevolent, right? We do our work and we see flourishing.
Yeah.
Gratitude, compassion, all of life is sacred, justice, just love, joy, creativity, ecstasy. That is there to be downloaded.
I
right?
think
that
there's
is there to fill us up.
formula that can be developed. Dr. Goodman, her research, since she started from the field of understanding that of trance states from the possession perspective, wanted to look at what are the elements to not go there and still have that
To
experience.
be fully awake and
to
aware.
have a fully
and
awake
open the
experience of it.
bandwidth.
And that was
Yeah.
her research and study for the last
To
part of her
activate the
life.
physiology
Yeah.
in this way, because we can.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
she set up safety protocols for all of that.
She would
Anyway.
say that we are all ecstasy deprived because we've shut ourselves off from source in that field. Yeah.
All right.
So, your last words, David. Thank you. Thank you for this visit today.
No, well, thank you for inviting me. It was fascinating, for your great audience, and for the feedback. I think it's great. Yeah, I really had a great time. It was very, very enjoyable.
Thank you. And thank you for the work that you do.
I'll share his book titles right here.
Very
There
good.
we go. The Spirit of Healing, Inner Passages, Outer Journeys, and The Source. So
And there's another one, Bones from Africa. Bones of Africa.
yeah.
Yeah. So,
So
thank you for sharing your stories.
Tony's always telling us we're making him spend all this money, and his library's getting larger and larger constantly. And so
Oh,
good. Well,
dear.
Yes, you are.
yeah. Well,
So
good.
we do in Placidos. We just go to Tony's house and pick our book.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Why? Why have separate libraries? Everybody go to Tony's house. I'll give you his address. Just email me.
Oh dear.
All right. Thank you so much, David. And I'm going to turn everybody's mics on so they can all say goodbye to you. And blessings to you all. Stay healthy and well, and stay tuned.
Thank you.